We do show and tell every month, and typically when we have somebody from the University of Florida, we get 0 show and tell. But I guess they're proud to show if they got to take the chance that it might be scientifically valuable. So we'll start off with Joe Brandon.
We went up to North Florida and dove in a couple different spots. One of them, after crawling around and not seeing a single scrap of bone for an hour, we got on one little pocket that had a ton of stuff. I got 2 Miocene bone crushing dog canines. They're really rare. They're Borophagus dog canines. A little undescribed peccary jaw section. Sam got that deer leg. A whole bunch of 3-toed horse teeth. Some with some really cool wear. Some more incisors than more 3-toed horse teeth from a river than I've ever found, probably. And a bunch of other stuff, some gator stuff, sloth bones, just a really, really unique site.
That's it?
Yeah.
Did you say where river came out of?
No, I did not.
Well, it came out of a river that doesn't typically have a lot of Miocene stuff, from what I've heard.
Yeah. There's a few Miocene sites, but not many.
All right, we'll go again Tuesday. Sam Lilly. He's made his once-a-year pilgrimage to the fossil meeting.
That's right. For good reason. All right. So, like Joe was saying, we were diving this spot and we hadn't come across anything. I mean, no scraps of bone or nothing. And then it was all of a sudden, like we came on this one spot in the river, and it might have been 20 by 20, and it had all these bones there, and it was dusted with sand, and you were seeing stuff, and oh, that's something. Oh, that's definitely something. And you're picking it all up, and we couldn't figure out what it all was because it looked strange. So we were finding all these horse teeth, and then at one point I found this rhino tooth at the bottom that we think is Teleoceras, and that really told us that we were on something that was pretty cool. So we were finding Miocene aged fossils. So we had these 3-toed horse teeth. We've got 6 of them in a row here. I've got another one of the Borophagus, the dog teeth. Joe's got 2. Really killer sloth tooth. Maybe Phenobadastes, Pliomethanastes. Am I close? Nice sloth tooth. And then of course the deer leg, or this 3-toed horse hand, foot, since this is the end of the leg there, with the hoof core and the 3 digits behind it. So very cool.
We don't think it is.
Joe was able to take it and have it looked at, and we weren't sure if it was Neohyperion or Nanepus. So we're not sure, but very cool nonetheless.
Yeah.
Eileen.
All right.
Can everyone hear me? All right. So last weekend I went to North Carolina to pick up a new puppy, but I saw on a lot of like fossil shelling type Facebook pages that I guess they were dredging off of Holden Beach, North Carolina, and there was tons of sea biscuits coming in, and so I had to stop on the way, and so we found tons and tons of sea biscuits on the beach. Unfortunately, the day I went, the beach was just sand. Previous day, it was just covered in shell deposits, and like you could just see these just sitting everywhere, and people were just picking them like candy. So I got unlucky with the day that I went, but I braved the cold Atlantic water, and I had a nice scoop with me, and so I was able to still get quite a lot of these sea biscuits. These are Hardunia mortonis. They're from the Cretaceous period, so I thought that was also really cool. So we got a couple of those. Some of them are really beat up. I mean, and then I also found this really nice piece of rock but you can actually see some coral and some other invertebrates just kind of in there, so I kept it because I thought it was really cool. And then I also found this strange black thing that I thought was maybe a scoot of some sort, and since it's from the Cretaceous period and it looks reptilian, I'm just gonna say it's a dinosaur or something. Not accurate. And then this was my best one. This is the most complete one that had the least amount of damage on it. So even though it wasn't as luscious as all the pictures that I saw, we still came out pretty good. My mom and I went there and found quite a lot of them. So.
And you got a puppy.
What?
And you got a puppy.
And I got a puppy, of course. That's probably the best part, really.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Rob Carlson.
My first find was actually made at Fossil Fest. Just goes to show that you walk around the show and look for things, sometimes you will find things that are interesting. I picked up these little tiny sand dollars from one of the dealers. He actually used to work for a company that did well drilling. And he's got all the site information on here. They're from Polk County, 720 feet down from the well core. When I first looked at them, I thought, okay, I've collected these. There was a quarry up in Gulf Hammock that got down to the Avon Park, and it's echinoids that you find there, Neolaganum dali. But looking closer at a few of them, I noticed the paraprop, which is their little butt, was way closer to the margin than others. And so I went home, and luckily having a very good friend who's an echinoid expert comes in handy, called him, and he said, buy all of them. The other ones are actually going to turn out to be a new species. He's working on the Paleogene paper with Roger Portell right now, and that is going to be Neolaganum aldrichi, I believe is going to be the name. So, interesting enough, these are the only ones then in private hands. All the rest of them are museum or collections. So it's neat to have a species that nobody else has, even if they are just little tiny guys. I've been going out on the river a little more than I had been, luckily getting a little more time off of work. I guess the biggest heartbreaker, I collect modern equivalents. It's kind of neat when you're hunting fossils to be able to compare them to what we've got living today. This is soft-shell turtle that met his end in Eden, I believe, because he was out in the river recently. And I've been digging in pieces turtle that is going back together, and it's going to be, it's a soft shell. It's in a deep pocket of sand that now with the water low, you try digging and the sand's caving in as fast as you're moving it. So I'm hoping more of him is in the bottom of the hole. And when the water gets a little deeper and I can fan a little harder and move sand quicker, it may look closer to this. But it's still, at least it's going back together. There was a little rather beat up mammoth tooth in the same place there. Been very rolled. Of all things, a beautiful horse astragalus. Bird bone of some species, it's hard to tell with birds, so many of them look similar. Some random horse teeth, which you all have seen numerous of. A very well preserved camel, I believe camel incisor, which you don't normally find with the roots, which was fun. This is a to be determined. It looks like a complete bone. I'm thinking cetacean based on preservation in the area I was working, but maybe our guest people will have an idea. I always bring to the meetings, give the people and say,
Part of your boat, right?
that's what I thought, ear or back of skull. It looks cetacean to me based on texture and everything.
Yeah, part of periodic.
Okay. So, part of a whale skull. I was getting a few dinged up megs, which, they're always fun. What was interesting to me is you always think of megs being, rather wide And then makos tend to be very narrow, but managed to pull out a mako that's almost as wide as a meg, which is kind of unusual. See, he's got enamel peel on the backside. And then what I am thinking is a bear tooth. Hard to see because it's tiny. I've gotten bear molars before, but I don't know if that's the rear tooth of a bear. And you're a bear expert. You're the one that has bear in the museum, right? And what I believe is a beaver molar. Not the giant beaver, but little guys like we still have today. So just a nice assortment of stuff. Nothing, no screamers, but like I say, the turtle's what's got me excited. Because anytime you can find material that goes together, it's kind of neat to jigsaw puzzle them back together.
There you go.
Wow.
Thank you. And last one, Steve McCarty. Paleoanalysis. Steve actually had to sign autographs at Fossil Fest.
I had to sign A on it.
He wrote me a check, so that's 2. Weird.
So this is a fossil that I technically did not collect, but I picked it up when I was in Nebraska in May 2021.
Yes?
And so this is a hyenodon skull that was collected from Toadstool National Park in 1960. Now, when I saw this, it was something that I was immediately drawn to, and I really wanted to pick it up because not only is this an incredibly rare fossil, but in addition, you can no longer hunt in national parks. But that was a law that was put into effect sometime in the 1980s, and so it actually says on the bottom jaw that it was collected in summer 1960. So I picked it up, and that brown color that's on here is actually the color that this entire skull was when I first bought it. So I sent it off to Rob Carlson, and he cleaned it up for me, and now it looks like this. And he managed to keep the little bit of on there, the little bit where it says where it was collected and what year it was collected, which I love it. I'm so impressed with this. Thank you, Rob. Because not only does it show that little piece of information, but it also shows what color this thing used to be when it was first collected. Apparently, it was that color because of whatever binding agent was used back 60 years ago.
Very cool. Sir? And for the record, I was not a park when that 1960. All right. If I didn't miss anything, we're going to our speaker. Dr. Jonathan Bloch is here this evening from the University of Florida in Gainesville. I guess it's part of me getting old and having too many yesterdays. He seems like the new guy, but I guess he'll be here 20 years next year, right? 2014, he became the curator for Vertebrate Paleontology at the museum. That's your current role?
Yeah.
Okay. And so he's been I don't want to say this from someone else, he's been in Florida for 2 decades now, so a lot of folks know him, and he doesn't want to be known for this, but a lot of people know him from getting bit by the boa, but because of Titanoboa. And I'll often hear people say the guy that got bit, and we know who you're talking about, is Jonathan Bloch. He may say something about it, he may not, and he'll have to now, I guess. He did get bit by a boa constrictor while hunting boa in studies for his Titanoboa research. So, Dr. Jonathan, come on up. We're glad to have you here tonight. Thank you, sir.
All right.
Yes, and to set the record straight on the snake bite thing, when we did go hunting boa, but that was in the Everglades, and I didn't get bit there. Where I did get bit, and it was on TV, so that's the one you've probably seen, was by a green anaconda in Venezuela. And that was scary, and I think I've shown you all video of that. For those of you who weren't here when that happened, you can watch it on HCTV if you want. But it actually does bring up an interesting point. So I'm going to do something a little bit different today than other times that I've come to talk to you all. Because in some ways, when I come talk to you all, I come and talk about something really exciting that we just found, and or in the process of finding, and it's this really big splash, and you know, the significance is pretty well understood. And I'm going to explain a little bit of why, you know, we get there, how we get there. But one of the things I want to talk about today is a project that I think is sort of in the mid-course of that. So we haven't made the big discovery yet, but we're in that sort of exciting phase of working on it. And so I don't know, maybe after I go back to Indonesia in the fall, I've been there twice, I'll come back to you all and say, look what we found, it was absolutely incredible. But I want to show you some of where we've been looking and what we've been finding, why we're looking there. And just to put this, and also for those of you who don't know me at all, I will just introduce myself again then real quick. I'm a curator of vertebrate paleontology at the Florida Museum of Natural History. If you all know Bruce McFadden, Bruce and I are both curators at that museum. And if you all knew Dave Webb from before my time, that was the position that I filled when Dr. Webb retired. I have, in more recent years, taken on a more administrative role at the museum lately, which means a little less time for research than I would like, but it's been pretty rewarding as well. It's been a little challenging through the COVID years, I would say. So I'm the Associate Director for Research and Collections, which means I sort of oversee the research and collections arm of the Florida Museum of Natural History. We have 32 faculty curators in that, in collections and research, spanning everything from archaeology to invertebrate zoology to molecular systematics and plant systematics and everything in between. We have 31 collections managers who are also very professional in their own right, many of whom you all have interacted with, people like Roger Portel and Richard Holbert, and more recently, Rachel Narducci are collections managers in that museum. We have scientific staff. We have over 90 graduate students associated with our program, master's and PhD students, 125 other staff, including postdocs, undergrads, and people who work hourly, just in research and collections. So that's not the on-exhibit part of the museum that you see, but sort of what's going on with all of those specimens and things that we collect that aren't just going into exhibits, but are actually part of active research programs. My own research has focused primarily on Eocene mammals, and I'm interested in the origin and evolution of modern orders of mammals. So things like horses and artiodactyls and very much primates is a big emphasis of mine. I'm interested in climate change, and I'm also a professor in the biology, geology, and anthropology departments. And one of the things that sort of keeps me sane during my administrative time is that I do have an active lab. So I have, there's sort of 5 PhD students that work in my lab, and a couple of them have probably come to talk to this group about some of the research that they've been doing. Rachel Narducci works on the cranial anatomy of fossils and earthrins. Selby Olson works on fossil marsupials. Lazaro Vinola has been working on the Caribbean fossil record, including some of those giant owls that we just heard about, as well as the rodents and things that those owls are eating. He's very focused on those rodents, in fact, these days. Maria Camilla is working on fossil frogs, and Mitchell Rigler is an expert on fossil lizards. So when I think I'm just doing Zoom meetings all day long, I can go into my lab and talk to these folks, and they're actually doing real science, and it keeps me sane. But this is part of what's exciting about what's going on up in Gainesville is all of this really new research is being done by, the future leaders in vertebrate paleontology. All right, so I have shown this slide many times before, but it's sort of a complicated slide of the world but the bottom line is the sort of the reds and the purples, for example, those colors are supposed to indicate higher diversity. And this is a summary of vascular plant diversity, but animal diversity mirrors that too. And the main point is that only a small percentage of the Earth's surface is formed by rainforests in the tropics. But within those ecosystems, you have more than half of the world's plant and animal species in those tropical rainforest kind of areas. And that is something that's been interesting to me for a long time because in terms of our knowledge of what past life is like on the planet, as you go back, through the age of mammals into the age of the dinosaurs and even further back, most of our knowledge comes from higher latitude, both in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. So these are the higher latitude areas that very often are associated with deserts or other types of exposures where you can find rock exposures. You get into the tropics, and one of the reasons why there's so many there are so many plant and animal species, there's so many plants, it's covering up all of the rocks for the most part. So it's extremely difficult to find fossils in the tropics unless you're looking in a desert, and there are some, but they're rare. And they tend to be fairly recent. So it turns out Paleogene exposure of rocks, where you would look at what animals and plants look like, especially after the extinction of the dinosaurs, is extremely limited. So I was taught early on in my education that if you want to make big discoveries in the fossil record, you have to go to places that no one's ever been before, in time periods that no one's ever found anything before. And then if you find anything, which is almost impossible, you're told, then it'll probably be new, right? Because there'll be a place and a time where no one's ever looked before. If you go out to the Peace, you go out, many places that you look in Florida, you can do that. You absolutely can do that. But there are many places where you're going to look where most of the things that you find are things that people have found before. Right? It's really unusual to find new things. Well, there's a reason for that. They've been sampled very heavily. There are parts of Florida where that's not true. There are places where you can go that are still mysteries, but it's rare. And but if you go, for example, to tropical South America and can find rock exposure of Paleocene or Eocene age, and actually find bones in there. When I started working in Colombia, for example, there hadn't been any bones found at all, for example, for the entire 20 million years after the extinction of the dinosaurs in the tropics on terrestrial deposits. So that's why it's been very exciting for me to go to those places, just discovery to a certain extent. Plus there's a lot of questions. So the two projects that I've talked to you all before about in the tropics are projects in the Panama Canal and in Colombia. And because the Panama Canal is they basically dug, for hundreds, billions of dollars, they sliced through the rock to widen the canal, or build the canal originally, and then widen the canal later on. They spent all that money to get the ships through. Well, while they're doing that, they're uncovering all those fossils for us. So we had a project there where we went into the Panama Canal while they were widening it and collected fossils from a time and a place that are very poorly known. And this is also true for the coal mines of Colombia when I went down there. And because these were windows into times that we didn't have anything before, we didn't know what we would find. So when we got to Colombia, we started finding dinosaurs and turtles that didn't have any names or anything like that. And then we found this huge snake, which was, 50 feet long. There's a whole bunch, we found like over 30 of them. So some of them are really big, some of them are smaller. But this is Titanoboa, and that's the largest snake that we've ever found before. And that was unexpected, but it also was expected that we would find something weird, because it was in the tropics and it was in South America. We didn't know it existed before. We published that in Nature, it made a big splash. When we were in Panama, again, looking through a window that no one really had looked through before, we were expecting to find the kinds of things you'd find in Nebraska or in Florida or whatever, because at that time Panama was just a southern extension of North America, similar time periods to what we see in Florida and Nebraska, for example. They said we found a monkey. And it was the oldest, it's the oldest record, it's the only fossil monkey that's been found before the Great American Biotic Interchange on, you know, any part of the North American continent. And not only that, it's the oldest monkey of modern affinities. So it's what we call crown platyrun. And it was on the wrong side, it was on the wrong continent. So that was also published in Nature because this was like a big deal. It was a really big deal. So going to places people haven't collected, you know, big questions can be asked, and then people get excited about it, and then, you know, it gets a lot of attention, and you make documentaries, and it changes things. And you know, the interesting thing about the monkey was that it somehow crossed 800 kilometers of ocean from South America to North America. So there were depictions of monkeys on rafts with tropical drinks, and you know, sunning on hammocks and things like this. But we were also able to reconstruct what the entire ecosystem would have looked like down there in Panama. And this is very similar to sort of the age of Thomas Farm, for example, here in Florida. And many of the species that we found in Panama were just like what we saw in Thomas Farm, except it also included a monkey and a couple other strange things. So who knew, right? So it's with that in mind that I'm going to talk about Southeast Asia, which is also in the tropics. So this is part of that theme. And I've always wondered about Southeast Asia because I'm very focused on primates. I want to know where they came from. I've talked about the Paleocene mesothermal maximum with you all before. That was a period of time 55.8 million years ago, when all of a sudden primates appear in the fossil record like that in Asia, Europe, and North America, all associated with this global warming event. But nobody knows where they came from. And we've been looking all over the place. And to me, the answer is they came from the tropics, and I don't think they came from the New World for various reasons. So I think they either came from Africa or from Asia, but tropical Asia, you know. And back then, back in the time period that I'm interested in, which is the Paleocene and the Eocene, especially in the Eocene, that part of tropical Southeast Asia right there was part of a much broader region called the Sunda Shelf. So it was, these islands were kind of all connected with each other, and then they became islands again and connected with each other. Kind of like the Caribbean, the history of the Caribbean here in the Gulf. And no one has really ever, you know, gone to look for animals there, partly because it's a very hard place to work, extremely hard. So I went to the margin of what was the Sunda Shelf, and I'm not going to get too into it, but this is sort of a classic area here for thinking about boundaries between different kinds of animals and plants today and in the past. So there's a very famous line called Wallace's line that basically separates what we think of as the Australian and New Guinea kind of faunas from the Asian type of fauna. So when you get up into Sumatra, Borneo, and up into other parts of Southeast Asia, think of that as all connected as a single piece of land when the sea level was different, right? And then all of these things down here have fairly Asian affinities. And in fact, even if you look at, say, the modern distribution of orangutans, which is, you know, down here, in the past, in the Pleistocene, not that long ago, they were all up through South Asia. There were orangutans and all the fossil deposits going up north. Versus, you know, you get down on this side, and if you've ever been to New Guinea, there are tree kangaroos and like a lot of the same kinds of things that you see that have some relationship with the types of mammals that you see in Australia. So there's a dividing line there between these two provinces, and that line has been noticed for a very, very long time. And that's often referred to as Wallace's line. And that's a biogeographic barrier, and people often discuss like how long has that barrier existed between these two faunas. What's especially interesting to me also is I've always thought that maybe the origin of primates, you know, the group that we're all part of, might have happened somewhere down here at the most tropical part of the edge of the Sunda shelf. So it's been in part because it's one of the only places we haven't looked yet. So that's, that is, you know, and there's a lot of complicated parts of the story that I'd be happy to talk about some more, but let's move on. So that leads to a lot of questions for me personally that might not be as interesting to you all. But you know, one of the questions I have was there a separation between this Asian biotic province that I'm talking about and the Australian biotic province? Was that in place with the emergence of the Sunda Shelf Islands in the Paleogene? For me, that's an important question because it helps me understand what those faunas might contribute to in terms of the dynamics of some, like for example, the modern orders of mammals. There are some alternate kind of ideas that could be out there. There's a lot of stuff going on in the past with regards to, for example, India. You know, at this time, India is moving up through, you know, it's essentially through plate tectonics. India is moving sort of past Africa, and by the time you get to the Paleocene-Eocene boundary, it just starts to smash into South Asia. And so as India is smashing into South Asia, that also creates the uplift of the Himalayas, which are still uplifting today because India is still smashing into South Asia, still uplifting the Himalayas. It's an ongoing process, which is why those mountains are so high and glorious. But when that happened, you know, India had a very Gondwanan, everything on, the idea is that everything on India probably had a lot of relationships with things in Africa. And so it was essentially an arc, is how people have talked about it. It's an arc that sort of went through and then deposited the contents of the arc into South Asia. And so, and I'll talk about that in a second. So that's an interesting idea also, that maybe India might have contributed to the Paleocene boundary to, you know, some of the modern orders that we wonder where they came from. Okay, lots of questions. Oh, that's an old slide. So that should say 2012 to 2019, with another expedition in 2023. So these are expeditions to West Sumatra that I'm going to talk about here, and then I'll talk about some work in Kalimantan. So the fossils that I'm going to talk about in this next set of slides come from a place called the Umbalan Basin in the Barisan mountain range. And where that is Sumatra. This is West Sumatra right here. Here's where that basin is right there. And it's Paleogene age and had recently been interpreted as sort of marginal marine to terrestrial, which means you're looking at something that's close to the ocean, but somewhat on land in terms of deposit. So you read something like that as a geologist, and you say, this has potential, right? If there's rocks that are right next to the ocean, but are on land, there could be stuff there. And furthermore, when you also read that in that basin, there are mining towns, there are coal mining towns. So here's a coal mining town called Sawalunto in West Sumatra. Why is coal interesting?
Fossils. It is a fossil.
Coal is fossil, right? I mean, it's like fossil swamps. So you're on land, and furthermore, if you go into these coal mines and start splitting open the rocks, they're full of leaves. So something's eating those leaves. In fact, you can look at the leaves and you can see insect damage on them and stuff. So they're forests and things that are living there. And what are they? You know, and it gets you really excited. So this is the town of Sawalunto. We're just sort of looking out. It's kind of it's not a tourist town in Indonesia. This is like going to Kemmer or something like that in Wyoming. You know, it's a mining town, you know. So it's a little rougher than usual, but still a really cool town, full of really cool people. But a lot of the industry is surrounding the coal mines that are here. And this sort of underlines just sort of the issue with the tropics, right? So he's just standing, there's the background, there's the tropics, and the tropical forest, and everything's covered. You see any rock over there? Not a lot of rock. These creatures are living in that forest, especially in the higher areas. There was a Sumatran tiger that was around the coal mine we were working my last trip there, just walking around. So there's a lot of biodiversity there covering up the rocks. So it's kind of a challenge. It's also super wet. It's extremely wet. So it doesn't matter what time of year you go. This is the dry season. And this is some rock that we found, and we're trying to work in this, but it's pouring on us. So you can I guess you can give the poor paleontologists a break and say there's a reason why. It's not like we're being lazy. This is just really hard work to do. You all live in Florida, so you've probably collected in the rain before. But if you're also in a rainforest, it can be a little brutal. Okay, so this is one of the coal mines right here. A picture of a coal mine that we were exploring. This is exploring. I'm trying to engage you all in the exploration process. I'm really excited about it because I just planned another trip for November to go back to some of these areas. So I'm really excited about it. This is a coal mine. There's my friend John Paul Zonneveld. He's from Canada. He's holding up a block of leaf hash, from one of the layers, showing that there was life there. And these fossil plants are from the base of what's called the Samalunto Formation, which seems to be very much terrestrial, which means very much deposited on land. Underneath that is something called the Sankurawang Formation, which people thought was marine, but I think it's actually a lake deposit. So I think it's a freshwater lake deposit, like you see with the Green River Formation or something like that, with this beautiful fish. In fact, I think they're oil shales, which usually has beautiful preservation. And in fact, we found that it did have beautiful preservation. So just to take a closer look at and that's, if you look at the time scale, it's somewhere up here in the late, we're right in the mid to late Eocene here in terms of the age. So that's a good time to be looking. If you split open some of those rocks, this is Peter Wilf. He's a paleobotanist from Penn State. He's the largest paleobotanist, I think, in the world. He's a huge guy. Those are even huger leaves. And these are some fossils that Peter collected. And this is actually a fossil of something in the macadamia family, which is really neat. It's the first plant fossils of that group that have ever been found. So leaf fossils, they'd seen pollen before, but they'd never actually seen the leaves before. What's interesting about this is that it's what we call a Gondwanan, part of the Gondwanan floristic province, which means the southern continents. So things like South America, Africa, Australia, those are all Gondwanan. India is considered part of that Gondwanan province. So what he thinks is what's going on here is that is when India docked into South Asia, then these plants jumped off India and swung around into Southeast Asia. That's his idea. And that's based on the macrofossils here. But if you look at the pollen, which is summarized in this very complicated diagram, it also shows that. It shows you that there's some kind of interchange between the subcontinent and Southeast Asia. Now, whether that's over water before it docks, or once it docks and then spreads out as a big floristic province, which is neat. And of course, from an animal perspective, from my perspective, if the forests are doing that, well, especially the flowering plants that depend on dispersal, some of them depend on animal dispersal. There must be animals that are dispersing those forests, especially across the land connections. So those are the kinds of things that I kind of look for and get excited about. And of course, I'm focusing on the plants a lot because we didn't have as much luck with the bones yet, but we did have some. So we're walking up into the village of Tunisara, and it's really just a village that's up along a road. it's a hillside village, so it's a, you know, it's sort of, it's a house here, and then there's another one above, another one there, and you kind of wind through there. And we were basically, you know how when you drive through road cuts and you stop and look for fossils? That's kind of what we were doing. We were going on their path. We were going through path cuts, you know, and looking for fossils. And so that's some pictures of us going along there. One of the things we found along that path was an outcrop of the Sankuralong Formation, that freshwater lake deposit. And it turned out to be full of fish, all kinds of fish, just like you would expect for a freshwater lake, including some really nice, you know, whole body fossils of fish from the Eocene. And in fact, this is one that Alison Murray from the University of Alberta described. She's an expert on freshwater fishes, freshwater fish fossils. They're not actually easy to work with. There's so many different species of freshwater fishes that you really have to know their skeletons well to be able to describe them. Here's one that she published. It's in the group that giant gouramis are in, which are actually in Sumatra today, and people eat them. We ate giant gourami while we were in Sumatra. They're delicious. They're also, you see them in like pet shops and the aquarium. Yeah.
Well, I always think of this area as very volcanic, and so it says volcanic tufa. How thick is
Right.
that layer?
The Sankuralong, along that cut that we were walking, it was probably not more than 6 or 7 feet, but it gets much thicker in other places, many meters. But that's not volcanic; it's laid down by lake deposits. Yeah, and in fact, in fact, that's what we're trying to look. We're looking for very specifically looking for sedimentary rock, right? We're looking for basin, basin type of deposits. So we get away from the volcanic deposits, and we're looking for anything that was sedimentary that would have collected the fossils. That's what we're focused on. Okay, so we found a place above the Sankuralong Formation that was up into that more terrestrial Salento stuff, and it doesn't look like much, right? It's just sort of you would have passed that by, right? Not a good rock outcrop at all. But we could see that there were some fossils in there. So here, there's Jason Head of Titanoboa fame, and Thierry Smith, who's from Belgium, and they're helping. We're all clearing off this whole face. We found some little fun snail friends while we were doing it. I'm not sure what kind of snail that was. It was a weird snail. It had like a tiny little shell on its back. And the family who was living right down the road that we were able to hire some of them to help us clear the land, and they very generously allowed us to work on their property, and were extremely accommodating. They helped us put up this shelter here, which we thought was for the sun, but turned out to be for the rain. And we're clearing all that away and trying to get access to the rocks there is what we're doing. So exploring, and you put a lot of effort into this, not knowing whether it's going to pay off at all. Sound familiar? Except you're kind of time limited. You've just spent 2 weeks trying to get all the you spent a whole year trying to get the permits organized. Then you spend 2 weeks in country trying to make sure all the logistics are taken care of, all the vehicles are taken care of, you've got places to stay, you've got all that. Also now you have like a 10-day window where you have to actually find something. That's the thing. So the pressure's on, right? So this is a section that we measured, sort of right here, and you can see a little bone. Those little bone, there's little bone emojis or whatever right there, and those are all levels where we found fossil bone in place. And the main vertebrate horizon where we started finding bone is down here at the base. Of course, it couldn't be somewhere easier. It was down, and furthermore, it was dipping straight down, which was also super annoying. But we opened that up, and we found fossils of fish, as you would have expected, in a freshwater kind of environment. We found amphibians, which is also somewhat expected, but totally exciting. We found crocodiles, we found turtles, we found snakes, and we even found a mammal, which is of course what I've been looking for. We have a lot more work to do. So this is as we're digging down into that layer, and we're starting to take out chunks of, and it's really kind of it's almost like a coal, you know, it's a lignitic layer, it's a very organic rich layer that interfaces with mudstone. And so you're chunking into that and sort of, and breaking it, you know, and hoping, you know, to see fossils in there. And you can see one of the challenges that it was dipping pretty deeply, so we had to kind of keep digging and cutting down and trying to pull out what we were calling the pay layer, right? So you get in a pay layer, you're going like this in a hole, and you're trying to, you know, uncover it with the sand. We were getting down onto that, our hole just keeps plunging down in there. You can see we're using banana leaves to cover ourselves from rain, because of course we didn't bring raincoats because we were there in the dry season. That was silly. And then we're sitting underneath that tent breaking rock. And here's Terry with a machete. We used the tools that we had to break rock. We also have rock hammers and picks. There I am with Jason Head looking for some. And there's some of the bones that are starting to come out, you know, in that sort of dark black stuff. Now, are they the most exciting bones in the world? I don't know. I was pretty excited. They're not like that giant discovery yet. What you're looking at there on the middle one there, you can see there's a crocodile tooth sort of in the center. And then to the right of that is a turtle, costal, I believe, which is interesting. Now, hold the press though, because they're the first crocodiles and the first turtles to be described from the Paleogene to the Cinder Shelf in the world. So that's neat. I mean, you can say that when you look at a place where no one's ever found anything. You can say that about anything you want. So, right, because it's all the first. There's another crocodile tooth, which I'll talk about more in a second because it's super cool. I think there's a crocodile vertebra up on the right hand there. And, there's Zaim, really excited about some bone that he found. He's a professor of geology on the island of Java. Very often when we're out there and collecting these things, you know, you can't see, you got sweat dripping down, you can't see what you're finding. So one very important part of this process, this exploration process for us in the tropics, is every night coming back, unwrapping that stuff, and looking at it underneath, you know, with our hand lenses and everything, and trying to figure out what it is that we found, so to know where to concentrate, you know, our efforts the next day, and to properly catalog them, and also just to keep to stay positive, you know, because during the day, like, are we really accomplishing anything here? And then at night, you see all the stuff you found, and you're like, this is fabulous, you know, absolutely excellent. So here we are identifying the things that we found. Each one of these folks is an expert in one of the animal groups that we were collecting. And so we always have a lot of fun with the cataloging sessions in the evening. Here's another example of one of the verandas that we were able to work on. That's Rush Shahan and Greg Gunnell, who have done a lot of work in Myanmar. And here they are, they're very excited because they just uncovered a piece of what we think is a frog maxilla. It's a part of the maxilla of a frog, a big frog. Again, never found before this time. So that's kind of fun. James Gardner from Royal Tyrrell is describing that animal. Turtles. You all know Jason Borg. Some people know Jason. Jason got super excited about the turtles we started bringing back. And that's why they're so beautifully prepared. Because Jason really, once he gets excited about it, he starts prepping it. So he's a good preparator. It's not beautiful stuff, but this is a costal bone right here of a soft-shelled turtle, just like one of the ones we saw earlier today. And it's the kind of soft-shelled turtle. There are a number of different kinds of soft-shelled turtles that exist out there. But you can see all these sort of like laterally oriented ridges that look a little wavy along there. That's very typical of actually living Asiatic soft-shelled turtles today, you know, in terms of the texture and their costal anatomy. That's a peripheral bone of one of the geomynids that we have, which are old world pond turtles. You all know what a pond turtle looks like. And then there's a costal there of a tortoise, which is really quite interesting. It's a moderate sized tortoise, not like one of the giant tortoises that we sometimes see in the fossil record. And on. We have a number of turtle taxa now from the site. They're the oldest, the only ones known from the cinder shelf and the Paleogene. Jason's been working on those, so that's exciting. So it's not like we didn't find anything, we found some stuff. There's also the back of a skull here. Right here is a partial brain case of a crocodiloid, so something related to crocodiles. And it's kind of hard to see here. Here you're looking at it from the side. Here it's just a piece. Here you're looking at it from the back. Well, I think I have a better view in the next one. This is a part of a mandible. There's some teeth of it. Those are osteoderms, the skin bones that you find in the crocodile. Having a part of the back of the skull is important. So the one on the right hand side, you're looking at the back of the skull with the top part up. This is looking down on the top of the skull right here. This is the supratemporal fenestra, if you know what that is. This is the side view of the skull. That's the occipital condyle. So this is a new crocodile. We think we can name it based on this. We have also parts of the lower jaw and things with teeth and so on. And this is being worked on by Chris Brochu of crocodile fame. So it's an exciting animal. Also, I think one of my favorite animals so far that we found from this site, which was very unexpected for me, was this. So these are teeth. You say, well, what are those? I mean, okay, so there's some kind of crocodile. But if you look at the edges of the teeth, and look at them really carefully, look at the edges of those teeth. They're serrated, just like a shark's tooth or something, right? And what else? Like a dinosaur. It's like a dinosaur. So there are several different groups of crocodiles in crocodile history that have evolved these serrated teeth. One of them, and they're very strange, and one of them is called the planocranids, and the other are called the micosukines. They're also cebesus in South America. But the micosukines are known from the late Oligocene all the way up to the Quaternary of Australia and New Guinea. The planocranids are known from the late Paleocene to the early Oligocene of North America, Europe, and Asia. So one is Australian, one is Laurasian. Perfect testing ground for so is this animal from the Australian faunal, province, or the southern, or the Asian faunal province, right? Because there are these two kinds that have serrated teeth. So which one is it? Which I'm really wondering. And of course, being in the Eocene, it's right at the cusp of the last occurrence of planocranids and the first occurrence of micosukines, and it's right there in the cinder shelf, which is exactly geographically intermediate between these two ranges. So what is it? I don't know. We're in the process of doing some enamel microstructure analysis to determine whether you can tell these teeth apart from these major radiations just based on the enamel microstructure. Here's some fanciful reconstructions of what planocranids and micosukines might have looked like. Planocranids are famous because they had hooves. So they were running hooved crocodiles with serrated teeth. So pretty crazy animals. So anyway, we found something like that down there. We also found snakes, and now snakes are frustrating. And even though I love them because titanoboa, right? Snakes are mostly just vertebrae. They're mostly just backbone. So this is a tiny little vertebra. That's usually what you find in a snake. You can tell it's a snake because it has a special extra articulation on its vertebra that tells you that it's a snake. What kind of snake it is an anelioid, which is a snake that kind of looks like this. Where are anelioids found today? They are found in let's see. So anelioids are animals that like to dig in the ground. They live in wet forest habitats, so it tells us something about the climate back then, the biome that it was in. And to make a long story short, finding a fossil anelioid in Southeast Asia tends to support this idea of a link going back into the Eocene between India and Southeast Asia. So that matches the distribution of the anelioid snakes today. All right, moving on to this. So this is one of the fossils that I found. And it's a chunk of rock, and it looks like it just has a little sliver of bone in it. And I almost just threw it over my shoulder, because I thought, well, this is nothing, it's just a rib of something. But I handed it to my friend Doug Boyer, and he looked at it and he said, handed it back, he said, John, you might want to take another look at that. So I looked a little more carefully, and I realized that we'd found the first definitive mammal from the Eocene of tropical, Southeast Asia. And it's a rodent incisor, which was disappointing and exciting at the same time. It was disappointing because it's a rodent incisor, and it was which is one of the least diagnostic teeth I could think of.
Yeah.
But it definitely shows you it's a rodent, which is cool. And it also shows you there are mammals there, which we kind of knew there had to have been, but also that they could be found, which is probably the most exciting thing about it. Based on the curvature and the wear facet, we think it's a lower incisor, just to confirm that it did have enamel and it wasn't just some kind of chunk of bone. That's a cross section. You can see the dentine, and you can see the very hard outer surface, which is the enamel of that tooth. Because it was the only tooth we found, we sent it out. We sent it to Sweden. I think she was in Sweden at the time, and showed it to an expert in enamel microstructure of rodents. This is Daniela Kaltoff from the Swedish Museum of Natural History, who studies this. And what you're looking at there is a scanning electron microscope view of the enamel of that tooth. And the bottom line is, so the EDJ, that's the enamel dentin junction, is right there, you can see it. And then you can see there's these different fabrics of enamel. And I'm not gonna make too big of a deal about it, but like this fabric here, HSB, which is also called Hunter-Schrager bands, layered on with radial enamel like that, within rodents, the way that looks, it's very distinctive of a very single kind of rodent. There's only one kind of rodent that has enamel that looks like that, which is neat. And that rodent is these Tinohystriciums. And that's a clade that includes the Laotian rock rat, includes comb rats, and includes things like porcupines, mole rats, guinea pigs, capybaras, the stuff you find in South America. So there, it was like, it's a totally neat incisor to find at that time. So it's got me really excited about what else we could find, for sure. And for some context there, what that basically shows us, that Eocene Sumatra line is mine. That arrow there? We think that these animals originated in higher latitudes in Asia. And then they spread out from there into Africa. And then at some point by the late Eocene, somehow they got from Africa to South America, across the Atlantic.
Yeah.
Which is very strange. That's at the same time that monkeys got across as well.
Right.
But at that same time, they somehow also got all the way down into the edge of the Sunda Shelf. So they were really moving everywhere at that time. So this is the first tropical representation of one of these things in the old world, even though we knew that they were in the tropics of, the old world, but of Asia, even though we knew they were in the tropics of Africa and South America. Well, that's making a lot out of a single rodent incisor, but I've done my best. So what I will say is that, so where are we with Sumatra? Where we are is that my last trip there was right before COVID. It's like a month and a half before COVID shut us down. And we brought all of that, we brought all these amazing fossils back. And then Jason, the preparator at the Florida Museum of Natural History, Jason, we all shut down. Jason was working off his dining room table. And he was not working on these fossils. It was too much to do during COVID. And so only now, once we've really started things up again, will we be able to make the time to prepare that stuff we recently collected. So I don't know what else we're gonna find from the things that we made on our last trip to Sumatra. I haven't actually seen a lot of that stuff. This was a little bit older stuff. So I'm very excited about that. So some of the discovery is going to happen this year while that preparation is going on. I'm excited to see what else is in the rocks that we found. But there's another part that I'm really excited about also. That was the Umbalang Basin. I've also now made 2 trips to this island here, which is, broadly speaking, what we think of as the island of Borneo. But Indonesian part of Borneo where we were working is called Kalimantan. And so that's there. And then we worked in a fun place called the Awesome Basin, which is awesome. And it's adjacent to the Burrito Basin, which is also cool. Burrito Basin, awesome Basin. I'm from California, so that's awesome. And this is it also is middle to late Eocene in the Tanjung Formation, and also we think part of that same margin of the Sunda Shelf. And so there's a huge unexplored basin that extends from what you see there is the Awesome Basin all the way up into central Borneo, which has never been explored except by a single geology PhD student from Australia who wrote a dissertation about it. And I read it and then wanted to go. And guess what? Coal mines. There's a ton of coal mines in there. So it's a similar kind of story. There's a coal mine. See all these beautiful layers in there? Just gorgeous. Some of those layers are marine, and some of them are terrestrial. It's an interface between marine and terrestrial. And so there's a little reconstruction of what that, some of the way that sedimentary structure. So this is what we do when we're exploring, when we're doing this, is we have to be geologists. We have to understand what these rocks are to be able to know where to look for the fossils, And we have to know their age too, which if you're going to these parts of the world. So up until this guy's dissertation that I read, before that, all the interpretation for 100 years before that, for this entire part of Kalimantan, was that it was 100% marine. So the weird thing was I read it and he said, no, it's not 100% marine. There are leaves there, there's bird tracks, there's burrows, there's all kinds of stuff. So well, that sounds like it needs some exploring. So here we are, we went to this mine in the Awesome Basin. It's like the Cerrejón coal mine, in that it's a giant coal mine in the tropics, which means there's constantly spontaneously combusting coal everywhere. This happens in tropics and coal mines. So that's not, someone didn't like that fire, that just happened, right? And it smells horrible, but we're happy anyway, it's super hot. Here's some examples of burrows that I was able to find. There are burrows, there are little leaf impressions. That's clearly a bird footprint. We have whole trackways that we've now documented from this mine. We have a paper that we just submitted about those. Actually, there are also if you're interested in this kind of thing, there are also beak marks around the footprints, showing that where they were probing. They're beak probe marks. Kind of neat. Yeah, and then we didn't ignore the marine sections either, because we're exploring. And I was looking for terrestrial stuff, but no one's ever looked at the marine stuff here either. And so we got into this, and it was so fossiliferous. It was so incredibly fossil. I don't know if you can see these little flakes right there, the little forams sticking out all over the place in this mud. Those are crabs, whole body crabs with legs and body segments. We must have collected 600 crabs from this one area here, and full of all kinds of different invertebrates, solitary corals. This is right in a very high diversity, today a very high diversity place for corals. It's called the Coral Triangle or something like that. It's some of the highest diversity of corals in the world, and apparently, some of that diversity goes back into the Eocene here, especially with the solitary corals. We found a handful of shark's teeth, sawfish, this pristis right there, which is just a cartilage with a bunch of teeth that we're associated with. These are all undescribed things. One of the things I'm going to do when I go back to Kalimantan in November, we only collected maybe 5 or 6 shark's teeth. But it was so fossiliferous that we're going to bag up a bunch of sediment, screen wash it, and we'll probably get hundreds of them. So we haven't written those up in a paper yet because we don't have a big enough sample to say something really interesting. I think that'll be pretty cool. We also got into an area where there were some other kinds of vertebrates. So that's top of the catfish skull right there. There was some palm associated with that, a big bunch of fruit, and then there was a catfish skull and a chunk of turtle, a pleurodire turtle, which is a side-neck turtle. So it's the first record of a pleurodire from the Paleogene of oceanic Southeast Asia. So anyway, we think that there's a lot of potential here in Kalimantan. We're going to go explore a lot on the next trip. And that's pretty much it. So I was pretty much just wanting to show you all sort of a progress report, something I'm really excited about, and also trying to sort of emphasize, one of the neat things about this is to going to new places, or even like going to old places and thinking about them in new ways, and focusing on places. Like, you should always wonder if people say there's no fossils there, that might be a good place to go. Especially if the geology tells you there should be something there. There probably is, it's probably just that they're very rare. And if they're very rare, they're worth finding. So that's, I guess, my main emphasis. And the gist of this is, generally speaking, I think what we're seeing is faunas and floras that mirror, that are basically a southern extension of what you might expect for an Asian oceanic, for an extension, a tropical extension of what you would see in Asia, with a contribution from places like India and maybe even Australia occasionally into that province. And I'm still mildly optimistic that we could find very exciting other records, with further exploration. So that's it.
Questions?
One thing I do want to emphasize also is that I was talking to a couple of people earlier about this idea of, I was talking to one person in particular, this idea of helicopter science, so just sort of dropping into an area and doing your work. And that's something that we very much try to resist in the kind of work that we do. So I just really want to emphasize that most of the geology work that we were depending on, and to a certain extent some of the paleontological work, but most of the geology work, which is like 95% of what is required here, was done by our incredibly skilled colleagues throughout academics as well as industry in Indonesia. And there are colleagues that are helping us write the papers. They are writing the papers themselves, and we contribute what we can. And so that's the kind of work we're doing there. Yep.
You said it's not a tourist place. What's the cost of living like there? Was it expensive? And
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. So the cost of living there was very cheap by our standards. I mean, incredibly cheap. I mean, you could go buy a banana for less than a penny or something like that. It was very cheap for buying food or something like that. What's not cheap are things like renting a car or gas. These are things that most of these folks are not doing unless it's something their business gets for them. Your average person is not doing that. They might have a motorcycle or a bicycle or something like that, but they're not going to be having a car. So it's very expensive to have a car, gasoline. So that kind of logistical stuff is extremely expensive, in part because there's just not a lot there. So you're competing for very limited resource. But the rest of it is very cheap. Hotel is very cheap. The food is very cheap.
Did locals try to sell you stuff that they found? Come up afterwards and say, "Here for a collection of rocks"?
Interestingly not. But I think that's reflective of the fact that these fossils are very rare. Or if they're very common, they didn't see the value in them. And that's especially true, for example, the coal mines. I mean, the coal miners are like, we see leaves every day. This is not coal is leaves. I mean, what's the problem? We sell this for pennies. And, coal is almost worthless. So coal is not worth a lot.
Thank you.
Wow.
Next Dave. Okay, we're gonna bring Lawrence and Curator Cotton up. They have a short skit on more extinct birds, right?
Yeah,
All right.
it's all due to Easter coming up. I mean, rabbits deliver the eggs, but the birds have to lay them. And that isn't easy.
Mic on you. This is your pocket. You got a mic pocket.
Giant birds have always played a large part in human culture. Whether it's the Maoris and their giant moa of New Zealand, or the 8-foot tall bird that lives in New York City that's colored yellow. Here we have 5 more giant birds presented to you. And I got my tape measure here. Number 5, the dew. That's D-U. Known scientifically as Sylviornis, this large flightless bird, standing around 3 to 5 feet tall, was native to the archipelago of New Caledonia. Known from many subfossil remains dating back to the Holocene epoch, this relative of the game bird family was slow-moving and fed on low-growing plants, roots, and tubers. Yeah, imagine the drumstick on that thing. The Kanak people indigenous to the region called the bird the dew, and it was hunted to extinction by their ancestors who arrived there around 1500 BC. Now get ready for this next bird because it's a really big one, and it can fly. Number 4, the pseudo-tooths, or false-tooth birds. Named for the bony tooth-like points on the edges of their beaks, the false-toothed birds were the dominant seabirds during much of the Cenozoic era, and were among the largest flying birds ever to have existed, with the largest, like this Pelagornis, having wingspans ranging from 16 to 24 feet. And just so you know, this is a 25-foot tape measure. It's amazing how these birds were able to fly at all. In fact, some people thought that since they were so big, they couldn't fly, but we know that they can. They would have used air currents like seabirds today from the ocean surface to help stay airborne. And they could have traveled all over the world, probably sleeping while flying, like albatrosses do. The teeth of their beaks would have been used to holding on to slippery prey. And as their teeth were easily worn down or broken off, they would have preferred eating soft-bodied squid and fish, filling the role of, like today's albatrosses, and of course the famous pteranodon pterosaurs that preceded them. The pseudo-toothed birds existed on Earth for 50 million years and became extinct just over 2 million years ago, very due to likely the climate changes that led to the Ice Age and also changes in ocean currents. Now, number 3, who could it be? Can you guess who? Owls are well known for their silent nocturnal hunting, but in prehistory, some took to enormous sizes, some flightless, others not, in response to living on islands with few to no mammalian predators. On the Mediterranean Isle of Crete lived Athene cretensis, a large 2-foot-tall relation to the Eurasian little owl. On the Hawaiian islands of Maui, Kauai, Oahu, and Molokai were the stilt owls of the genus Gallostrops, so named for their particularly long legs, also standing around 2 feet high. So can you imagine an owl standing about this big? Yeah. There were also giant barn owls living in the Bahamas that stood 3 feet 3 inches tall. And on the island of Cuba, the one that we've illustrated for you, is Ornamengalenix, the largest owl to ever exist, standing at 3 feet 7 inches tall. Its fossils were originally mistaken to be those of terror birds. They were so big. And like them, their long legs suggested it was a fast runner and undoubtedly preyed on the giant rodents and insectivores and dwarf ground sloths that once lived on the island. The disappearance of the giant owls on all of these islands have been attributed to the arrival of surprise humans who competed with the birds for prey and disrupted the ecosystem. Can you imagine a giant owl just staring you right in the face? As if living owls aren't sort of scary enough. Number 2, The Maori legends of New Zealand tell of a giant predatory bird called the pauakai, which was said to be so large it could grasp a grown man in its talons and carry him off to its nest to feed its ravenous young. The story was likely inspired by the very much real, but fortunately extinct Haast's eagle, Hariatus morii, aka Harpagornis. With a wingspan of 8 to 10 feet across, talons as big as tiger claws, and the beak the size of a butcher's cleaver, this was the largest eagle ever to have existed. Yet, ironically, its closest living relative is the little eagle of Australia. 8 to 10 feet. So imagine the bald eagle has a wingspan of 8 feet. And this is how wide its wingspan would have been. If you can hold the other end. The reason for its large size was due to the fact that there were no mammalian predators on New Zealand. It had evolved to fill the niche of an apex predator in a land still dominated by dinosaurs of the avian persuasion. Its main prey consisted of the large flightless moas, a bird up to 15 times its own weight. It swooped down on its hapless prey at speeds of up to 50 miles per hour. Its size and weight during a strike indicate a force to be the equivalent of dropping a cinder block from the top of an 8-story building. Like other island species, the Haast eagle extinction coincided with the arrival of the Maori on New Zealand. The Maori hunted the moas and other birds for food, eventually hunting them to extinction by the end of the 14th century. And with its main source of prey gone, the Haast eagle too vanished into extinction. Thank goodness. Oh, I mean, it's sad, but do you think we'd really want a giant eagle flying around? And finally, number 1. Today, the California condor is the largest land bird in North America. With a wingspan of over 9 feet, it was once very close to becoming entirely extinct, with only 22 birds remaining in 1987. Thankfully, breeding programs in captivity have helped to increase their numbers to over 500. Their now extinct relatives, known as teratorns, were even larger, being among the largest birds of prey and among the biggest flying birds. With the largest, Argentavis, the one that we've illustrated, having a wingspan of around 20 feet. These birds soared over both North and South America from the late Paleogene to the end of the last ice age, preying on small animals as well as scavenging the remains of those caught in the tar pits at the risk of becoming trapped themselves. The last species to exist, Teratornis merriami, had a 13-foot wingspan and lasted up until 10,000 years ago. It is thought that the disappearance of the megafauna, the mammoths, mastodons, and ground sloths, led to the bird's extinction. However, there are some unconfirmed sightings of these birds in the yet untamed wilderness parts of the United States, Canada, and especially in Alaska, where there are few people living. So who knows, maybe one is still out there. The immense size of these birds, along with their condor cousins, may have helped to inspire the Native American legend of the Thunderbird. And rightfully so. I hope you all enjoyed this look at giant birds.